The wind howled across the plains of the Troad. Cold, sharp, and relentless. As if the land itself remembered an old betrayal. Far beneath the rising walls of the future Troy. Long before Paris, before Helen, before the great war that would shake the world. Another story lived here. A story of arrogance, divine wrath. And a curse that would echo through generations. Tonight, we go back to the beginning. To the very roots of Troy's tragedy. To the moment a king defied the gods. And doomed his bloodline forever. This is Episode 1, The Curse of Troy, How It All Began. To understand why Troy fell. Why heroes like Hector and Aeneas were fated to suffer. Why the gods themselves turned against the city. We must start with the man who built Troy's foundations. A king named Laomedon. A ruler whose pride reached far beyond the walls he wished to raise. But to understand this curse, we must go back to a time before Troy existed, when the gods still walked among mortals, and deals with immortals came at a terrible price. Long before Laomedon, a city already stood on the same sacred hill. It was called Ilium, founded by a mortal named Aeolus, the great ancestor of Troy's royal line. Aeolus had once traveled to Phrygia to compete in athletic games. His victories impressed the king, who awarded him 50 young men and 50 maidens, a symbolic gesture of great honor. But Aeolus' true reward did not come from mortals. One night, while Aeolus prayed to Zeus for a sign, a sacred object fell from the sky, a shining statue called the Palladium. It was said to be a gift from Athena herself. A divine promise. As long as the Palladium remained within the city, Troy would never fall. Aeolus built the first walls of Ilium, believing no power on earth could challenge him. But he was wrong. For even divine protection cannot save a city from the flaws of its rulers. And one ruler would test the patience of the gods themselves. Aeolus' son, Laomedon, inherited the throne after his father's death. At first glance, Laomedon seemed a worthy king, strong, intelligent, ambitious. A man determined to create the greatest city the world had ever seen. But beneath the surface lay something darker, a streak of arrogance. A belief that he could outwit anyone, mortal or divine. Laomedon wanted grander walls. Walls taller than Aeolus ever dreamed of. Walls that would intimidate enemies. And proclaim his power to all nations. But to build such walls, he needed labor beyond mortal limits. And so, Laomedon made a decision that would shape the fate of Troy forever. He dared to bargain with the gods. One day, as Laomedon stood surveying his half-finished walls, two strangers appeared. To human eyes, they looked like wandering craftsmen, muscular, sun-browned, with tools slung over their shoulders. But these were no ordinary men. They were gods in disguise. Poseidon, lord of the seas. And Apollo, god of the sun, music, and prophecy. Banished, temporarily, from Olympus for plotting against Zeus. They sought work among mortals. And Laomedon, blind to their true nature, saw an opportunity. He approached the two strangers and said, "Build my walls. Make them strong, unbreakable, eternal. Do this, and I will reward you with riches beyond measure." Poseidon and Apollo agreed. Not because they needed gold, but because they enjoyed labor among mortals, a chance to shape the world with their own hands. For an entire year, under the blazing sun and through bitter cold, the two gods worked tirelessly. Poseidon lifted massive stones as easily as pebbles. Apollo shaped and polished them until they fit with divine perfection. Together, they built ramparts so tall that birds changed direction to avoid crashing into them. Under their hands, the city began to transform into a fortress worthy of legends. Laomedon watched, impressed. But in his heart, greed began to grow. At the end of the agreed year, the walls of Troy were finished. People of the Troad gathered in awe, whispering, "These walls were shaped by the gods. No enemy will ever conquer Troy. This city will stand for eternity." Poseidon and Apollo returned to Laomedon to claim their payment. But the king's eyes had already changed. The spark of ambition had shifted into the shadow of treachery. Laomedon said, "I owe you nothing. Leave at once, or I will have you beaten and driven from my city." For a moment, the two gods remained silent. Not because they were powerless, but because they could not believe a mortal would dare cheat the divine. Apollo's eyes glowed with quiet fury. Poseidon's breath stirred the dust at their feet. And then, Poseidon spoke with a voice that rolled like thunder. "Laomedon, son of Aeolus, your arrogance will be your ruin." Apollo added, "This city shall fall. Your line shall suffer sorrow after sorrow. The curse begins now." With that, the gods vanished. And the skies darkened over Troy. When gods curse a city, the punishment is never subtle. The very next season, Poseidon sent a sea monster, a massive beast with scales like black stone and eyes blazing like fire. It rose from the bay near Troy, smashing ships like toys, tearing apart fishermen, and sending waves crashing into the city's outskirts. Farmers abandoned their fields. Merchants fled. People whispered in terror, "This is the wrath of Poseidon. This is the curse of our king." The monster demanded sacrifice. Every month, a maiden was chosen by lot to be chained to the rocks near the sea. A terrible offering meant to calm the beast. But the monster never went away. The curse remained, growing stronger and hungrier. Laomedon tried everything to hide the truth. He told his people, "The gods envy our greatness. This is a test of Troy's strength. We must endure." But behind closed doors, the king knew the truth. He had brought this curse upon his own city. The priests advised him, "Send for help. Find a hero. Only a mortal blessed by the gods can save Troy now." And so, Laomedon reached out to a name that echoed across the world. A name destined to shape myths for ages. Heracles. Heracles arrived in Troy not as a humble savior, but as a living force of nature. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in the skin of the Nemean lion he had slain, with a bow said to have been crafted by the god Apollo himself. Laomedon greeted him with false humility. "Great Heracles, slay the monster that plagues our city. Save Troy, and I promise you the horses Zeus gave to my father. Horses no mortal has ever seen. Horses born of the wind." Heracles agreed. He did not know that Laomedon had no intention of keeping his word. The next dawn, the people of Troy gathered on the cliffs. Far below, a maiden was chained to the rocks, a trembling sacrifice selected by cruel fate. The waters churned. The sea trembled. A monstrous shape broke the waves. The sea monster rose, its roar shaking the earth. Its jaws wide enough to swallow a ship whole. And then? Heracles stepped forward. He drew his bow. The first arrow struck the creature's eye. The second pierced its throat. The third buried itself deep in its heart. With a final roar, the monster collapsed into the sea, staining the water red. The people of Troy erupted in joy. They hailed Heracles as savior. The curse seemed lifted. All that remained was one thing: Laomedon's promise. When Heracles came to claim the divine horses, Laomedon's expression hardened. He said, "You have done little? A beast slain by arrows. I will not reward you. Leave Troy and never return." The people gasped. Even Laomedon's servants trembled. But Heracles said nothing. He simply stared at the king. His silence was colder than the sea itself. Then he turned and walked away. Before leaving, Heracles spoke only one sentence. "Laomedon, when I return, I will tear down these walls, stone by stone." And he departed Troy with a fury not even the gods could restrain. Years passed. Troy grew stronger. Laomedon believed the gods had forgotten their curse. He believed Heracles would never return. But one day, black sails appeared on the horizon. Heracles had come back. Not alone, but with an army of warriors, men hardened by battle, loyal to him beyond death. Laomedon panicked. He tried to negotiate. He offered gold, silver, jewels, anything, except the horses he had promised. Heracles was unmoved. "You broke your word," he said. "Now Troy will pay the price." This was not the famous fall of Troy that would come centuries later. This was the first destruction. A lesser-known tragedy. But the one that planted the seeds of the greater fall to come. Heracles' attack was swift and brutal. The god built walls that Laomedon had relied upon. The walls Poseidon and Apollo themselves had crafted, offered no protection. Because the gods who built them now stood against them. Heracles broke through the gates. Trojans fled. Laomedon's sons were killed. All except one. A young prince named Podarkes. When Heracles stormed the palace, Podarkes threw himself at the hero's feet. According to legend, Podarkes offered his gold-embroidered veil, a simple, heartfelt object, in exchange for his life. Heracles was moved by the boy's courage. He spared him. Podarkes would later become known as Priam, the future king of Troy, and the father of Hector. Laomedon was killed by Heracles. His arrogance had destroyed him. His betrayal had doomed his family. But the curse did not die with him. It passed to Priam, and then to Priam's children, and to their children. Generations later, when Hector stood before Achilles, when Andromache wept over her child, when Aeneas fled the burning city, all of it, every tragedy, every loss, was rooted in Laomedon's arrogance. The gods never forgot. And Troy paid the price again and again. The fall of Troy did not begin with Paris, or Helen, or any mortal love story. It began with a broken promise. A king who cheated the gods. A curse that spanned centuries. From this single betrayal, an entire civilization was doomed. This is the true beginning of the Trojan Saga. The spark that would ignite an age of heroes. A decade of war. And a legacy that would shape history. And that was the story of Laomedon. The man who cursed Troy with his pride. Next time, we follow this curse to its next chapter, the birth of Paris, the prince whose destiny was written long before he took his first breath. If you want more stories from Trojan mythology, subscribe for weekly episodes.